I never thought my life would turn into one of those dramatic stories you hear about, but never expect to happen to you. Yet there I was, standing in front of my own house with an eviction notice flapping against the door like a cruel flag. My name is Lyndon and I teach high school English. I spent my days grading essays and trying to inspire teenagers to love Shakespeare. But that day, my mind was far from sonnets and soliloquies. I remember the moment vividly. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the neighborhood. I'd just finished a long day at school, and all I wanted was to kick off my shoes and relax. Instead, I found myself frozen on the doorstep, staring at those harsh words. Eviction. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a mix of disbelief and anger bubbling up inside me. I yanked the notice off the door and stormed inside, my mind racing. Graham, my husband, was supposed to be handling the bills. We'd agreed on that. He worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, which meant he had more time to manage things like this. But clearly something had gone terribly wrong. Graham! I called out, my voice echoing through the house. There was no immediate response, just the distant hum of his computer. I found him in his office, headphones on, completely oblivious to the storm brewing just outside his door. When he finally noticed me, he looked up with that charming smile that used to melt my heart. Now it only fueled my frustration. Hey Lyndon, how was your day? I tossed the eviction notice onto his desk, watching as his smile faded into confusion and then something else. Fear, maybe? What is this, Graham? He picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the words. I could see the color drain from his face. I can explain. Please do, I said, crossing my arms. My voice was steady, but inside I was anything but. I wanted to understand, but I also wanted to scream. Graham sighed, running a hand through his hair. Work's been slow. I thought I could catch up before it got this far. I didn't want to worry you. I shook my head, disbelief washing over me. Not worry me? Graham, this is our home. How could you keep this from me? He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I thought I could fix it. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But this wasn't the first time he'd hidden things from me. Little things like forgetting to pay a bill or missing a deadline. But this was our life, our stability, and he'd let it slip through his fingers. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice softer now, tinged with hurt. I was afraid, he admitted, finally looking up. Afraid of what you'd think. Afraid of failing. His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt a mix of emotions, betrayal, anger, and a deep sadness. This wasn't just about money. It was about trust, the foundation of our marriage. And right now, that foundation felt like it was crumbling beneath my feet. I need some air, I said, turning away before the tears could fall. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside, the cool evening air a stark contrast to the heat of the moment. Standing on the porch, I tried to gather my thoughts. How had we ended up here? I thought about the early days of our relationship, the promises we'd made. We were supposed to be a team, but somewhere along the way, things had changed. I heard the door open behind me, Graham stepping out. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, his presence a silent plea for understanding. Lyndon, I'm sorry, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll fix this. I promise. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. I wanted to believe him, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. Could I trust him to keep this promise? Or was it time to take matters into my own hands? As the sun dipped below the horizon, I knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. And whatever lay ahead, I would face it head-on. I had to, for my sake and the sake of our future. But as I turned back to Graham, a question lingered in my mind, one I couldn't shake. Was this the end of us, or just the start of something new? The next morning felt like waking up in a fog. My mind was still tangled in the mess of the previous night, but there was no time to dwell on it. I had a classroom full of teenagers waiting for me, and they deserved my full attention. As I stepped into my car, I could feel the weight of the eviction notice in my bag, a constant reminder of the chaos brewing at home. At school, I tried to focus on my lesson plan, but the words on the page blurred together. I was halfway through explaining the symbolism in The Great Gatsby, when I caught myself trailing off. My students stared at me, their eyes wide with confusion. I forced a smile, trying to shake off the distraction. Sorry guys. Long night, I said, hoping to brush it off. Alara, my best friend and the school's social worker, noticed my frazzled state during lunch. She slid into the seat across from me, her eyes filled with concern. Lyndon, you look like you haven't slept in days. What's going on? I hesitated, the word stuck in my throat. But Alara had a way of seeing through my defenses. I sighed, finally letting the truth spill out. Graham's been hiding things from me. We might lose the house. Her expression shifted from concern to disbelief. What? How could he let it get that bad? I shrugged, feeling the frustration bubble up again. He thought he could fix it without telling me. Now we're in this mess, and I don't know what to do. Alara reached across the table, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. You need to take control, Lyndon. You can't let him keep you in the dark like this. Her words struck a chord. I nodded, knowing she was right. But it was easier said than done. Part of me wanted to believe in Graham, to give him the benefit of the doubt. But another part of me was screaming for action, for change. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I was on autopilot, going through the motions while my mind raced with possibilities. As the final bell rang, I made a decision. I needed to take on extra tutoring sessions. It was the only way to make sure we didn't end up on the street. After school, I approached Jonas, the principal, to discuss the additional work. He listened intently, nodding as I explained my situation without delving into the personal details. I admire your dedication, Lyndon, he said. But make sure you're not taking on too much. You have to take care of yourself too. I appreciated his concern, but I knew this was something I had to do. Thank you, Jonas. I'll be careful. As I left his office, I felt a small sense of relief. It wasn't a complete solution, but it was a start. I was taking control, just like Alara had urged. That evening, as I prepared dinner, Graham hovered nearby, his presence a constant reminder of our unresolved issues. I could feel his eyes on me, but neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken words and unaddressed fears. Finally, he broke the silence. Lyndon, about last night. I paused, setting down the knife. Graham, we need to sort this out. I can't keep living in uncertainty. He nodded, looking more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. I know. I messed up and I'm sorry. I didn't want to disappoint you. His admission tugged at my heart, but I couldn't let it sway me. We're in this together, Graham. You have to let me in or this won't work. He nodded again, a silent promise hanging in the air. But I needed more than promises. I needed action. Later, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than Graham was letting on. Something deeper, something he wasn't telling me. And that thought kept me awake long into the night. The next day, as I prepared for my tutoring session, I received a text from Alara. It was a simple message, but it carried a weight of its own. You're stronger than you think. I'm here if you need anything. Her words bolstered me, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. But as I headed into the classroom, I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets were lurking in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. The weekend arrived with a heavy sense of foreboding. I had barely settled into my Saturday routine when the doorbell rang, echoing through the quiet house. Graham was still asleep, oblivious to the world, so I went to answer it, half expecting a delivery or a neighbor. Instead, it was Martha, Graham's mother, standing there with a determined look that immediately put me on edge. She breezed past me into the living room, her presence commanding attention. We need to talk, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. I closed the door, bracing myself for whatever was coming. Martha was a force of nature, and I'd learned to respect her forthrightness, even if it sometimes felt like a steamroller. I heard about the eviction notice, she began, cutting straight to the chase. And I'm not here to sugarcoat anything. I nodded, taking a seat across from her. I appreciate your honesty, Martha. I really do. But I'm not sure how much more I can take. She softened slightly, her eyes filled with a mix of empathy and frustration. Lyndon, you need to know something about Graham. This isn't the first time he's let things spiral out of control. I felt a jolt of surprise. What do you mean? Martha sighed, leaning back in her chair. When he was younger, he had a habit of biting off more than he could chew. Always chasing after the next big thing, but never quite finishing what he started. His father and I bailed him out more times than I care to admit. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd always known Graham had a tendency to overreach, but I hadn't realized the extent of it. Why didn't you tell me this before? I hoped he'd grown out of it, Martha admitted, her voice tinged with regret. But it seems some habits die hard. I sat there, absorbing her words, the pieces of the puzzle slowly coming together. Graham's charm, his endless ideas, his inability to follow through. Suddenly it all made sense. But it didn't make it any easier to swallow. Martha reached out, placing a hand on mine. I'm not saying this to hurt you, Lyndon. I just want you to be prepared for what you might be up against. I nodded, grateful for her candor, even as it left me reeling. Thank you, Martha. I needed to hear this. Just then, Graham appeared in the doorway, looking bleary-eyed and disheveled. He paused, taking in the scene, and I could see the tension ripple through him. Mom, what are you doing here? Martha didn't flinch. Graham, we need to talk about your future. And about what you're doing to Lyndon. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly caught off guard. I'm handling it, okay? Are you? Martha challenged, her gaze unyielding. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're dragging her down with you. Graham's jaw tightened, and I could see the struggle in his eyes, the conflict between pride and shame. I'm trying, Mom. I really am. Martha sighed, her expression softening. I know you are, but trying isn't enough. You need to face this head on. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over us like a shroud. I could see the cracks in Graham's facade, the vulnerability he tried so hard to hide. And for the first time, I realized just how deep his struggles ran. Martha stood, her presence still commanding even as she prepared to leave. I'll give you two some space. But remember, Graham, you're not alone in this. And neither are you, Lyndon. As she left, I turned to Graham, searching for the right words. But before I could speak, he let out a shaky breath, his shoulders slumping. I'm sorry, Lyndon. I've been keeping so much from you. I reached out, taking his hand. We need to face this together, Graham. I can't do it alone. He nodded, a flicker of determination in his eyes. I'll do better. I promise. But even as he said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover, more secrets lurking beneath the surface. And as I watched him retreat into the kitchen, a new resolve took hold. I would get to the bottom of this for both our sakes. The next day, as I prepared for my tutoring session, I received a call from an unknown number. Hesitant, I answered it, only to be met with a voice I didn't recognize. Is this Lyndon Hawthorne? Yes, who's calling? This is about Graham Winslow. We need to talk. The line went dead, leaving me with a chilling sense of foreboding. I had no idea who it was or what they wanted, but I knew one thing. The past was catching up to us, and it wasn't going to wait. The call from the unknown number lingered in my mind like a shadow. I tried to push it aside, focusing on my tutoring session, but the nagging feeling that something was about to unravel wouldn't leave me. As I worked through algebra problems with my student, my mind kept drifting back to the cryptic message. After the session ended, I found myself dialing the number back, my fingers moving almost of their own accord. I was met with a voicemail, and the words I'd rehearsed in my head vanished. This is Lyndon Hawthorne. You called me earlier about Graham Winslow. Please call me back, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I went through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere. Graham was out, supposedly meeting a client, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his absence than he let on. When he finally returned, I was in the kitchen, pretending to be engrossed in making dinner. He walked in, offering a casual hey, as if everything was perfectly normal, but I could sense the tension in his posture, the way he avoided looking directly at me. How was your meeting? I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. It was fine, he replied, his tone clipped. Just the usual stuff. I nodded, stirring the pot on the stove. I got a strange call today. Someone asking about you. He froze just for a moment before recovering. Oh, what did they say? Not much. Just that they needed to talk about you. I watched him carefully, noting the slight twitch in his jaw. Probably just a telemarketer or something, he said too quickly. Maybe, I agreed, though I didn't believe it for a second. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, and I could feel the distance widening. That night, as I lay in bed, sleep eluded me. I kept replaying the conversation, dissecting every word, every pause. Something was off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all connected to the secrets Graham was keeping. The next morning, I was greeted by another surprise. As I checked our bank account, my heart sank. A significant sum had been withdrawn, and I had no idea where it had gone. My mind raced, a mix of disbelief and betrayal surging through me. I confronted Graham as soon as he walked into the room, my patience worn thin. Graham, there's money missing from our account. Do you know anything about it? He hesitated, and that was all the confirmation I needed. Lyndon, I can explain. Please do, I said, crossing my arms, trying to keep my voice steady. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I needed it for a project. It's important, and I was going to tell you. A project? I echoed, incredulous. Graham, we're on the brink of losing our home, and you're siphoning money for a project? He looked away, shame etched across his features. It's not just any project. It's something that could change everything for us. I shook my head, the anger and hurt colliding within me. You keep saying that, but all I see is you digging us deeper into this mess. He reached out, but I pulled back, the distance between us now a chasm. Lyndon, I'm doing this for us. Are you? I challenged, my voice rising. Because it feels like you're doing it for yourself. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I turned away, unable to look at him, the weight of his betrayal pressing down on me. Later, as I sat in my classroom, trying to find solace in the familiar chaos of school life, I received a text. It was from the unknown number. Meet me at the cafe on Main Street. It's important. I hesitated, the rational part of me screaming to ignore it. But curiosity and desperation won out. I needed answers, and this might be my only chance to get them. The cafe was bustling, but I spotted the person immediately. A woman in her late 20s, her expression a mix of determination and anxiety. She waved me over, and I approached cautiously. Lyndon, thank you for coming, she said, her voice low. I'm sorry for the secrecy, but this is about Graham. What's going on? I asked, my heart pounding. She took a deep breath. I'm his business partner. Or at least I was. We've been working on a project, but things have gone south. He's in over his head. The revelation hit me like a tidal wave. I sat back, trying to process her words. What do you mean? He's borrowed money from some questionable sources, and now they're coming after him. After us. The ground seemed to shift beneath me, the world tilting on its axis. I'd thought I knew the extent of Graham's troubles, but this was a new level of chaos. And I was caught in the middle of it, the stakes higher than ever before. The cafe meeting had left me reeling, my mind spinning with possibilities and fears. I returned home to find Graham in his office, buried in his work. The sight of him, so engrossed in his world, only fueled my frustration. How could he be so oblivious to the chaos he'd dragged us into? I paced the living room, trying to calm the storm inside me. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Finally, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I marched into his office, my footsteps heavy with determination. Graham, we need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face. What's wrong? What's wrong? I echoed, incredulous. I just met with your so-called business partner. She told me everything. His expression shifted, a mix of guilt and defensiveness. Lyndon, I can explain. Explain what? I interrupted, my voice rising. That you've been borrowing money from God knows who? That you're dragging us into something dangerous. He stood, his posture tense. I was trying to fix things. I thought this project could be our way out. Our way out. I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. Graham, this isn't just about you anymore. You've put both of us at risk. He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. No more excuses. No more secrets. I need to know everything, right now. He hesitated, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. But finally he relented. All right. I borrowed money from a group. They're not exactly legitimate, but I thought I could pay them back once the project took off. And what if it doesn't? I pressed, the fear and anger bubbling over. What happens to us then? I'll figure it out, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I shook my head, the weight of his words pressing down on me. Graham, this isn't just about you anymore. I can't keep living like this, waiting for the next disaster. He reached out, desperation in his eyes. Lyndon, please. I'm doing this for us. Are you? I asked, my voice softening despite myself. Because right now it feels like you're doing it for yourself. He flinched, the truth of my words sinking in. But before he could respond, the doorbell rang, cutting through the tension like a knife. I went to answer it, my heart pounding. Standing on the doorstep was a man I didn't recognize, his expression unreadable. Lyndon Hawthorne? Yes, I replied, wary. He handed me an envelope, his gaze lingering on me for a moment before he turned and walked away. I closed the door, staring at the envelope in my hands, a sense of dread settling over me. Graham appeared beside me, his curiosity piqued. What is it? I don't know, I admitted, tearing open the envelope. Inside was a letter, the words scrawled hastily across the page. As I read, my heart sank. It was a warning, a thinly veiled threat from the people Graham had borrowed from. They wanted their money, and they weren't going to wait much longer. I handed the letter to Graham, watching as his face paled. This is serious, Graham. We're in over our heads. He nodded, his expression grim. I know. I'll fix it. But his words felt hollow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. I needed to make a decision, to take action before it was too late. That evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I thought about everything that had led us here. The lies, the secrets, the constant fear. I'd always believed in justice, in doing what was right. But now I wasn't so sure. I picked up my phone, dialing Alara's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice a balm to my frayed nerves. Lyndon, what's going on? I don't know what to do, Alara, I confessed, my voice breaking. I'm scared. She listened patiently, offering words of comfort and advice. You need to protect yourself, Lyndon. You can't let Graham's mistakes drag you down. Her words echoed in my mind long after we hung up, a reminder of the choices I had to make. I couldn't keep waiting for Graham to change. I had to take control, to protect myself and my future. As I lay in bed that night, I knew what I had to do. It was time to confront Graham, to demand transparency and set boundaries. I couldn't keep living in fear, waiting for the next disaster to strike. The next morning, I woke with a newfound resolve. I would face this head-on, whatever it took. And as I prepared for the day, I couldn't help but wonder. Was this the beginning of the end, or the start of something new? The morning after I resolved to confront Graham, I felt an unfamiliar heaviness in my chest. It was as if the world had shifted overnight, leaving me teetering on the edge of an abyss. I knew what I had to do, but the thought of it left me feeling hollow. I found Graham in the kitchen, staring blankly at his coffee. He looked up as I entered, offering a tentative smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning," he said, his voice strained. "Morning," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. The tension between us was palpable, a silent acknowledgement of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what needed to be said. "Graham, we need to talk about everything. The money, the threats, your plans. I need to know what's really going on." He sighed, setting his mug down with a soft clink. "I told you I'm handling it." "But you're not," I countered, frustration seeping into my voice. "We're in over our heads, and I can't keep living like this." He looked away, his expression one of defeat. "I just need more time." "Time for what?" I pressed, my patience wearing thin. "To dig us deeper into this mess?" He flinched, the truth of my words cutting through his defenses. "I thought I could fix it before it got this bad." "But it is this bad, Graham," I said, my voice softening despite myself. "And I can't wait around hoping you'll magically make it right." He didn't respond, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. I could feel the weight of his unspoken fears, the burden of his mistakes pressing down on both of us. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about leaving. Starting over somewhere else." The admission hit me like a blow, the air rushing from my lungs. "You were going to leave?" I asked, disbelief mingling with hurt. "I thought it might be the only way to fix things," he said, his gaze fixed on the floor. I stared at him, the reality of his words sinking in. He was willing to abandon everything, to run away from the problems he'd created. And in that moment, I realized how far we'd drifted from the life we'd once envisioned together. "I can't do this anymore, Graham," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "You need to decide what you really want, and I need to protect myself." He looked up, panic flickering in his eyes. "Lyndon, please. I need you." "I can't be your safety net," I replied, feeling the weight of my decision settle over me. "Not if you're not willing to change." The conversation ended there, the finality of my words leaving us both reeling. I left the house, needing space to think, to breathe. I wandered aimlessly, my mind a whirlwind of emotions and fears. As I walked, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Alara. "I'm here if you need to talk. You're stronger than you think." Her words were a balm to my frayed nerves, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. But even with her support, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the precipice of something irreversible. Later, as I sat in the park trying to make sense of everything, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I answered it anyway, hoping for some clarity. "Lyndon Hawthorne?" a gruff voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "This is about Graham. He owes us, and we're not waiting any longer." The threat hung in the air, a chilling reminder of the danger we were in. I ended the call, my heart pounding in my chest. The world felt like it was closing in, the walls of my carefully constructed life crumbling around me. I knew I had to act, to make a decision that would change everything. But as I sat there, the enormity of it all felt overwhelming, the path forward shrouded in uncertainty. Returning home, I found Graham waiting for me, his expression a mix of hope and fear. "Lyndon, I've been thinking. I want to fix this. For us." His words were sincere, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing doubt in my heart. "I need time, Graham, to figure things out." He nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I'll be here when you're ready." As I retreated to the bedroom, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. I was at my lowest point, the future uncertain and fraught with peril. But deep down, I knew this was a turning point, a chance to reclaim my life and chart a new course. And as I lay awake that night, I couldn't help but wonder, was this the end of us, or the beginning of something I couldn't yet comprehend? The days that followed my decision to take control were a blur of tension and anticipation. I knew the confrontation with Graham was inevitable, and the weight of it loomed over me like a storm cloud. It was time to face the truth, to confront the demons that had haunted our marriage for too long. Graham and I hadn't spoken much since our last conversation, each of us retreating into our own worlds. But as the weekend approached, I knew it was time to address the elephant in the room. I found him in the living room, staring out the window, lost in thought. The setting sun cast long shadows across the floor, a fitting backdrop for the showdown that was about to unfold. "Graham," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We need to talk." He turned to face me, resignation etched across his features. "I know." I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. "I can't keep living like this. The lies, the secrets, it's tearing us apart." He nodded, the sadness in his eyes mirroring my own. "I've made a mess of things, Lyndon. I know that." I stepped closer, the distance between us both physical and metaphorical. "Why didn't you trust me? We could have faced this together." He looked away, guilt and regret warring within him. "I was scared. Scared of failing, of losing everything." "But you already have," I said, the words hanging heavy in the air. "You've lost me, Graham." His head snapped up, panic flickering in his eyes. "Lyndon, please. I can change. I'll do whatever it takes." I shook my head, the decision already made. "You need to do this for yourself, not for me. I can't be your reason. You have to want it for you." He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand, cutting him off. "I'm leaving, Graham. I need to find myself again, to figure out who I am without all of this." The silence that followed was deafening, the weight of my words settling over us like a shroud. I could see the realization dawning in his eyes, the understanding that this was the end of us as we knew it. Just then, the door swung open and Martha stepped in, her presence commanding as ever. She took in the scene, her eyes flicking between us with a knowing gaze. "Lyndon Graham," she said, her voice firm. "It's time for some tough love." Graham looked at her, confusion and fear mingling in his expression. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I'm here to make sure you face the consequences of your actions," she replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I've decided to disinherit you, Graham, unless you change your ways." His eyes widened, shock and betrayal flashing across his face. "You can't be serious." "I am," Martha said, her gaze unwavering. "I love you, but you need to grow up. Lyndon deserves better, and so do you." The room fell silent, the gravity of her words sinking in. I watched as Graham processed the ultimatum, the reality of his situation finally hitting home. He turned to me, desperation in his eyes. "Lyndon, I shook my head, cutting him off. "This isn't about me, Graham. It's about you. You need to figure out who you are and what you want." He nodded, the fight leaving him. "I understand." Martha stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We're here for you, Graham, but you have to take the first step." As I watched the exchange, I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. This was the closure I needed, the end of a chapter that had been filled with pain and uncertainty. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was the right decision. I turned to leave, pausing at the door to look back at Graham one last time. "Take care of yourself, Graham." He nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "You too, Lyndon." And with that, I stepped out into the cool evening air, the weight of the past finally lifting from my shoulders. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I felt free. As I walked away, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The themes of justice and revenge had been tested, but in the end, it was about finding peace within myself. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. Moving into my new apartment felt like stepping into a new chapter of my life. The space was small but filled with light, a stark contrast to the shadows I'd left behind. I spent the first few days unpacking and arranging things just the way I liked, each box emptied feeling like a weight lifting from my shoulders. Alara came over on a Saturday afternoon, armed with a bottle of wine and a pizza. "To new beginnings," she toasted, her smile warm and reassuring. "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. The wine was crisp and refreshing, a reminder that life could still hold moments of joy and simplicity. We spent the afternoon talking and laughing, the conversation flowing easily. I found myself opening up about everything that had happened, the words spilling out like a release. Alara listened, offering support and understanding, her presence a balm to my frayed nerves. "You've come a long way, Lyndon," she said, her voice filled with pride. "I'm so proud of you." "Thank you," I replied, feeling the truth of her words settle over me. It hadn't been easy, but I'd made it through, stronger and more resilient than before. As the evening wore on, we moved to the balcony, the city lights twinkling in the distance. I felt a sense of peace, the chaos of the past few months finally fading into the background. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Alara asked, her gaze thoughtful. "Sometimes," I admitted, leaning back in my chair. "But for now, I'm just focusing on the present, on finding myself again." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That's all you can do." We sat in companionable silence, the weight of the world finally lifting. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. The next morning, I found a letter in my mailbox, the handwriting instantly recognizable. It was from Graham, and my heart skipped a beat as I opened it. "Lyndon, I know I've hurt you and I'm sorry. I've been doing a lot of thinking since you left, and I realize now that I need to change. Not for you, but for myself. I hope one day you can forgive me, but I understand if you can't. Thank you for everything. Graham." The words were simple but heartfelt, a glimpse of the man I'd once loved. I felt a pang of sadness, but also a sense of closure. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a step in the right direction. I tucked the letter away, knowing that forgiveness would come in time. For now, I was content to focus on my own path, to embrace the journey ahead. As the weeks passed, I found solace in my work, the familiar routine of teaching grounding me. Jonas, ever the supportive mentor, noticed the change in me and offered a knowing smile. "You seem lighter, Lyndon," he remarked one day after class. "I feel lighter," I replied, the truth of it resonating within me. Life continued, each day bringing new challenges and opportunities. I learned to set boundaries, to prioritize my own needs and well-being. It wasn't always easy, but it was necessary. One evening, as I sat on my balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. The themes of justice and protection had been tested, but in the end, it was about finding peace within myself. I knew that some questions would remain unanswered, that life was rarely neat and tidy. But I was okay with that, content to embrace the uncertainty and the possibility of what lay ahead. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, I felt a sense of fulfillment, a deep-seated contentment that had been missing for so long. I was finally free, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. And as I sat there, a gentle breeze whispering through the trees, I couldn't help but smile. This was my story, and I was ready to write the next chapter, whatever it might hold.